Hello everyone, hope you're all well. Today we're back on the JL Media YouTube channel and I'm going to be going through and reviewing the Hungarian Grand Prix that just happened yesterday. We're going to be going through all the practice sessions, we'll be going through the qualifying results and then obviously the race on the Sunday. Just covering sort of the teams that I think done well, what drivers had a good performance, and obviously going through a little bit about the racetrack itself, looking ahead for the rest of the Formula 1 season. If this is content that you do like, then obviously feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. Like I say, I'm trying to do a broad sort of topic in football, Formula 1, boxing, so if them are sort of things, the topics that you would like us to cover, then just let us know and we can get more videos out on this. But without further ado, we'll head straight into the video. So a little bit about the Hungarian Grand Prix first of all. The track name is the Hungaroring. It's quite an infamous track. So I think it had a lot to deliver this weekend and there was lots of things that went on. But I think it was a very good race overall, a very good weekend, especially for some teams. It was a 70 lap race yesterday and the interesting thing with the Hungaroring is the two DRS zones that they have in place. So DRS is obviously a drag reduction system. It's basically a little flap at the back of the car that will open up and obviously allow more air to pass through, therefore allowing the car to go a bit faster down the main straights. The interesting bit about the Hungaroring is where them two DRS zones are positioned, specifically for overtaking, basically on the main straight sort of thing. So yeah, 70 laps it was yesterday. And obviously just touching on first of all the practice results. I know sometimes it's a bit difficult to take things from the practices, but the main thing was obviously the two McLarens were consistent throughout all three practices, as they have been for a lot of the Formula 1 season. The car that they've designed is incredible, how quick that is. The other interesting thing to note as well is obviously on Ferrari. I thought they performed well over the three practice sessions. And obviously we will get on to the qualifying and the race later on, but it was promising for them at the start of the week, I thought, especially, like I say, over the three practice sessions, and I think there was a lot of expectation on them in the qualifying, especially after the race last week as well, but obviously we'll touch on that a little bit more. So I'll just quickly run through the practice one results first of all. So Lando Norris was number 1, Oscar Piastri was number 2, Charles Leclerc was number 3, Isaac Hadjar was number 4 in the Racing Bulls, which is Red Bull's like sister brand sort of thing. Then you had Lewis Hamilton, who was in 5th, Ollie Behrman in the Haas was in 6th, and then you had the two Mercedes, so Kimi Antonelli in 7th and George Russell in 8th, and then you had Max Verstappen in 9th and Lance Stroll in 10th. Then it was Alex Albon in the Williams and was in 11th, and Esteban Ocon was in 12th. Pierre Gasly in the Alpine was 13th. Liam Lawson in the other Racing Bulls was 14th. Carlos Sainz in 15th. Filip Drugovich in the Aston Martin, who I believe was covering for Fernando Alonso this weekend. He finished 16th. And then Yuki Tsunoda was in 17th, Franco Colapinto was in 18th, and the two kick Saubers, Gabriel Bortoleto and Paul Aron, was 19th and 20th. So, from what we're looking at there, the two Mercedes were quite consistent, the two Ferraris were quite consistent, the two McLarens were quite consistent. Obviously the one thing that is standing out is Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda. Obviously Yuki Tsunoda is the second driver at Red Bull, Max Verstappen's number 1. Red Bull have had a lot of problems with the car this year, I think. However, Max Verstappen's still performing at an incredible level to be able to get points on the board. Yuki Tsunoda hasn't really been delivering that many points. He's had a good couple of races here and there, but the main man is Max Verstappen. There was obviously a couple of rumours of him potentially leaving Red Bull to go to Mercedes. I think they've been squashed now. I think he's signed a contract extension at Red Bull for at least another year. But yeah, it seemed to be a bit of a disappointing first practice for him, behind the Mercedes, the Ferrari, and the McLaren. Ollie Behrman and Isaac Hadjar in there. Good result for them. And practice, this is what I'm saying, practice doesn't really mean a lot. But I suppose it's all about getting the performance out of the car. And that was a really good result for them, especially Isaac Hadjar in the racing bull. Obviously, I think Kick Sauber being 19th and 20th. They had Paul Aaron was in covering for Nico Hulkenberg, who got his first podium at the British Grand Prix a couple of races back. So the Kick Sauber can perform, we just don't see it very often. Like I say, Formula One for me has almost become, you have your top 3 or 4 teams, and then everything else below that is like a dogfight. It's just who can finish highest out of the rest of the pack. So yeah, unfortunately it wasn't great for Kick Sauber. But for me, McLaren, fantastic performance again, over the 3 practices, especially in practice 1. Okay then, so practice 2, again 2 McLarens were 1 and 2. Charles Leclerc was number 3, and then the 2 Aston Martins this time, so Lance Stroll in number 4 and Fernando Alonso in P5. With Lewis Hamilton in P6, and then you had George Russell behind him, Isaac Hadjar in the Red Bull in 8th, Yuki Tsunoda was up in 9th, and Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes was 10th, Ollie Behrman 11th, Nico Hulkenberg was in 12th, Esteban Ocon was in 13th, Verstappen was down in 14th, Liam Lawson was in 15th, Carlos Sainz in 16th, Gabriel Bortoleto in 17th, Alex Albon in 18th, and then the 2 Alpines in FP2 were 19th and 20th. That was Pierre Gasly in 19th and Franco Colapinto in 20th. So again with this one, as a pattern, this time the Aston Martins did perform better, and obviously that was with Fernando Alonso in the car this time. Lewis Hamilton was 5th in FP1, he then dropped down to 6th in FP2. And then a little bit of a similar story in FP3. You have obviously Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris in the 2 McLarens at P1 and P2. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton this time P3 and P4. Okay then, so in regards to the qualifying, this was where it got a bit interesting. Charles Leclerc took pole position. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris was P2 and P3. George Russell was P4 on the grid, and then Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll in the 2 Aston Martins in 5th and 6th. So that's a good qualifying for Aston Martin, consistent, sticking with each other. Gabriel Bortoleto in the Kick Sauber was in 7th, so that's what I'm saying, the Kick Sauber can get the performance it needs, but it just doesn't happen as often as some of the other teams. Max Verstappen was in 8th on qualifying, so he was in the top 10. Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar in the Racing Bulls was 9 and 10. Ollie Behrman in the Haas was in 11, and then Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari was 12th, so he went out in Q2. Carlos Sainz in the Williams was in 13th, and Franco Colapinto in the Alpine was 14th. Kimi Antonelli was 15th, Yuki Tsunoda was 16th, Pierre Gasly in 17th, Esteban Ocon in 18th, Nico Hulkenberg in 19th, and Alex Albon was bottom of the pack. So Q1, who was out? Well, it was Alex Albon, it was Nico Hulkenberg, it was Esteban Ocon, Pierre Gasly, and Yuki Tsunoda. So again, with Yuki Tsunoda, we've noticed a pattern with him where he doesn't tend to get out of Q1. He just can't seem to get the performance out of the Red Bull. I know the Red Bull is slightly tailored to Max Verstappen, and it has to be with the number 1 driver in a way. A lot of the teams will do that. They prioritise the number 1 driver, and especially with someone like Verstappen, who's now been at Red Bull for a long time, and they've developed him to be the number 1 driver. They've seen his potential. That's totally understandable, but I would still be expecting Yuki Tsunoda to be getting a little bit more out of the car, although I do believe it is the 4th fastest on the grid, behind obviously Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren as the fastest. Touching on the Aston Martins, that's a fantastic result from them. I think going back to the previous Grand Prix in Belgium, I don't believe they had a very good qualifying or a good race, if I remember correctly. So to see them getting fifth and sixth is a good result for them completely. With the pole position, Charles Leclerc took that away from the McLarens, and there was a bit of optimism, I think, but personally from me as well, that maybe we would have a non-McLaren winner in this race. Even George Russell had quite a lot of pace in the practice and in the qualifying, so even he could have contested. But yeah, good result from Leclerc. In fact, actually, apologies. In fact, actually, the top 10 in Q1, it was the tightest that it's ever been. I think there was only 5/10 of a second between all the cars in Q1. So it was a very good performance across the board, and it just goes to show, obviously, the finer details in getting that right to get to the top. But a fantastic performance, a fantastic lap from Charles Leclerc to get the pole. Obviously, if you've seen the onboard footage, it just goes to show how high level it is to be an elite Formula 1 driver, and Charles Leclerc is an elite Formula 1 driver. Obviously, hasn't won as many races as he would have liked to this year because of how good the McLarens are, but he really is competing in that Ferrari and trying to do as best he can. Gabriel Bortoleto had a good qualifying, and I think with Gabriel Bortoleto is a bit hot and cold. He'll have a very good race, and then the next week is back to the simple standards of just not doing enough. If he really pushes his performance in that Sauber, it can really work. And in fact, he actually finished above Max Verstappen in the qualifying, and like I say, it was really, really tight, but that's the level of performance that they need to be pushing every single week. Max Verstappen would have been a bit disappointed finishing in 8th for qualifying. He probably would have been a bit closer to that top pack, just to try and compete a little bit. But again, it's very difficult for him. Even when he has been finishing, maybe he's on the front row or the second row in qualifying this season, it's been difficult for him to try and get around that McLaren. If he doesn't do it on the first corner, before you know it, that gap's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the strategies with the McLarens seem to nearly always work, which obviously, again, I'm going to touch on because that has played a big factor in the race yesterday. The other one, just want to quickly mention as well, Lewis Hamilton. So, as I was mentioning before with the practices, Ferrari were looking quite good all the way through FP1, FP2, FP3, and unfortunately Hamilton didn't deliver that in qualifying. He was out in Q2 in 12th. So the interesting thing with Hamilton is it almost comes across like he's lost that belief of how good he is, because he is an elite driver, and it has been. Nobody wins 7 titles without being an elite driver, but it almost feels like he's losing that belief, or he's understanding and realising that age might be potentially catching up with him, and he can't deliver the same performance that he would have been able to do 4 or 5 years ago. We've seen towards the end of his Mercedes tenure that he was slowly falling off, and it almost looked like George Russell was overtaking him, and George Russell deserved to be the number 1 because he was outputting better performances, and he's coming at Ferrari, obviously the number 2 behind Charles Leclerc, and he made the point in the if you've seen the interview after the qualifying, you can see in his face obviously how distraught he was to go out in Q2 again. It's sad. It is sad to see. Obviously, with someone like that, an icon of the Formula 1 world, you want them to do well. You want them to always be as top class, amazing. And unfortunately, there comes a point in time where they can't deliver, and almost feels like Hamilton is realising that that time could be potentially now. He made the point and said that there's obviously nothing wrong with the car because Charles Leclerc got pole. That's a totally valid point. If Charles Leclerc can get pole, Hamilton can get better results out of that car, but it all comes down to that belief and the confidence that he has to have to use that car, and whether it's age or whether it's his confidence that's going, something needs to be looked into to see if he is the right person to get the best out of that car. But yeah, it was disappointing qualifying for him after having such a good run at practice, and it looked like it was on the up because of the qualifying. Like I say, in Belgium last week, it was a similar story. He went out in Q1, I believe, and had a very good, but he had a very good race at Belgium at Spa. Made up a lot of places. I believe he won Driver of the Day. It was fully justified, fully deserved. Um, and looking at the practices from this session, you were thinking potentially that the qualifying could have been a different story this time. It wasn't to be. So yeah, I don't think there's anything too much more to note on the qualifying. Kimi Antonelli finished 15th. He was a rookie that come in this year. This season's been the most inducted rookies from the start, and it's a big ask to take over the Mercedes number 2, which was George Russell. George Russell took the Mercedes number 1 from Lewis Hamilton after he left to go to Ferrari. So it's been a big season for Kimi Antonelli, and I think at the start it was looking really positive. It looked like he had a lot of potential, and he was doing really well, especially in the practice sessions using the car. It looked like he would have a really good season with Mercedes, and he's done all right so far. Nothing too out the way. But obviously towards the last few races of the season, especially after the big breaks they've had, it does seem to be like he's dropped off a little bit. I always thought that Spa would have been a difficult one for him. Yeah, you could tell with the practice and the qualifying he was struggling a little bit with it. The race he just sort of didn't do anything wrong, just got on with it and took whatever he could from it. But the qualifying he had today, the qualifying in Hungary, it was also a similar story. He finished 15th, which for Mercedes they would be expecting a better output than that, considering George Russell was 4th. Again, a similar story with Ferrari as with Mercedes. The one consistent team that we're seeing out of the top 4, in my opinion, which is McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, is McLaren, where them two are delivering exceptional performances consistently, and you can tell by the gap in the constructors, and McLaren is so far ahead because they're just chaining points together. But yeah, that's basically the gist of the qualifying. I think there was nothing else really too much to mention about that. But we will move on to the race. So what was interesting about the race, in my opinion, was obviously the strategies, and I think the strategies determined who won the race. I think that's clear as anything. Yeah, so when you look at the starting grid, so it was Charles Leclerc, it was Oscar Piastri, it was Lando Norris, and then it was George Russell. So I believe the pit stop strategy for a lot of the teams was a 2-stop strategy. McLaren had, I believe, asked Piastri if he wanted to do a 1-stop and if they thought that could work, and they decided it would be slightly difficult to do it with Piastri, but they've done it with Norris. So Norris had done 31 laps before his first pit stop, and believe that was on them. So there's all obviously on the mediums, the medium compounds. Then they went to the hards with Norris. They went a little bit earlier with Piastri, and then I believe Leclerc went in just after Piastri. So what they tried to do was they tried to undercut Leclerc. Leclerc come in straight after, so it didn't really work out how they thought. And then it was up to Lando Norris to run on the tyres until around about lap 25, lap 30. He actually managed to get to lap 31 before coming in, and then put the hards on, and that lasted him for the rest of the race. So going with the 1-stop strategy allowed him that ability to catch up to Leclerc, from what I gather. So with the strategies for the teams, it was essentially Piastri tried to undercut Leclerc, which didn't. He believed it wasn't the right strategy to go for because they brought Leclerc in a lap after him, and it didn't really reduce the deficit or allow him to overtake, sort of thing. They were just sort of at the same point. Although Leclerc then had fresher tyres because he was in a lap later than what Piastri was. So then they switched the strategy for Norris to say, we're going to 1-stop you. So he was on his mediums, and his mediums lasted him 31 laps, and then they brought him in on lap 31 for the pit stop to put the hard compounds on, and that lasted them for the rest of the race. So the thing was with Norris, he delivered really, really impressive pace as soon as he put them hards on, and he really reduced the deficit from Piastri and Leclerc. The strategy behind that was, if they had have condemned Norris to the 2-stop strategy, he would have automatically been finishing behind Piastri and Leclerc. So they had to try and do something different in the hope that it would work and allow him to win the race. And essentially that's exactly what happened. Right from the off of the race, the McLarens actually ended up, well, Norris ended up dropping 2 places. What happened was, obviously, the way they were starting, Piastri and Leclerc both moved over into the first corner as Norris was trying to come in, and obviously he had to ease off, and I think it was George Russell and Fernando Alonso that got round, and he was, before he knew it, he was down in 5th. So that wasn't a great start for McLaren in any case, but he obviously managed to get round Alonso, and then obviously was trying to work his way to get at Russell as well. Definitely a gamble from McLaren to try and do that, but this just goes to show the confidence that they have within that team at the minute, the performances that they're delivering. They're able to just take this risk and gamble and hope it works. But especially when they've got the car, the type of car that they do, and how quick and the amount of pace they get out of it, not a surprise at all. When they put that hard compound on, did they expect Norris to make up the amount of ground that he did? Probably not. But he didn't necessarily need to make up that ground. Like I say, he was so comfortable in his drive yesterday, until the end of the race. But it looked comfortable most of the way through. Obviously, Piastri would have been a bit disappointed that his strategy didn't work. But he's had a lot of race wins this year, and arguably Piastri's been outputting better performances than Norris for a lot of the year as well. He leads the Drivers' Championship at the moment, albeit by 7 or 8 points, so that can easily be closed. But yeah, he's been delivering great performances, Piastri. Unfortunately, yesterday he had to sort of succumb to second place, but that's where he finished in qualifying. He didn't lose or gain any places. It was just a consistent drive, and unfortunately the strategy that he tried to go with just wasn't the right one, because Leclerc reacted and come straight in. What McLaren then did decide to do was obviously to ask Piastri what he wanted to do about the second pit stop. They were concerned about whether it was a case of finishing above Leclerc, or Norris sort of thing. Did he want to finish first, or was he happy to finish second? And obviously, as a racer's instinct, he wanted to go out and win the race. So again, McLaren, always thinking, wanted to delay Piastri's pit stop, and they created a 14 tyre freshness gap between Norris and Piastri. So when you look at that towards the end of the race, you're thinking, well, he's got much fresher tyres, he can get much more pace out of them. That could be interesting in regards to the 3-way finish, which would be Norris, Piastri and Leclerc. And it got to that point where it was very interesting. Piastri actually had the opportunity to go past and overtake Norris as he got into the last 5 laps of the race. He was in the DRS zone, so them 2 DRS zones that we mentioned. Piastri was within range to try and get round Norris, and he very nearly did. If it wasn't for the brakes locking up, he potentially could have won that race right at the end. And again, you'd be talking about a McLaren masterstroke, because thinking on their feet, they thought of that strategy mid-race. What did Piastri want to do? This is how we're going to attack it. Obviously, the main motto for McLaren is to not crash into the other car, and that very nearly happened with the brakes locking up. So the message after that was pretty clear: you can't get round Norris. Norris will take the win, and Piastri takes second place, which I think they can't argue with. Piastri gave it a really good go, and unfortunately, second place, it's not disastrous. He still leads the drivers championship. So let's look forward from that point of view. In regards to Leclerc, who was supposed to be in the race, he obviously really fell off in the pace towards the end of the race, and George Russell gained and eventually overtook, and he ended up taking the third and final podium place, which is a bit disappointing because, like I say, Ferrari and Leclerc had a very good weekend. They had a really good practice. They had a really good qualifying. Well, Leclerc had a really good qualifying, and then they started the race off perfectly. The 2 McLarens ended up getting a bit tangled. Norris dropped all the way down to 5th, and Leclerc stayed in first. So that you couldn't have asked for a better start to the race. What really messed Ferrari around was Norris's strategy to go with the one stop, because obviously Ferrari, reacting to Piastri, had already then succumbed to going with the two stop, and there's nothing they could do about that. That obviously, like I say, that's contributed and took a lot of the pace away from them, and it allowed Russell to really catch up and get that third and final podium spot. Obviously, one interesting thing to note as well as part of the race was Max Verstappen's overtake on Lewis Hamilton. So Lewis Hamilton ended up finishing 12th in the race, and Max Verstappen ended up finishing 9th, and that was subject to the FIA's approval of Max Verstappen's overtake. They didn't rule anything wrong with that, although there was a lot of complaints about it. Personally, I didn't think there was anything wrong. I thought it was a perfectly legal overtake. But that if he had got a time penalty for that, then he would have obviously dropped down potentially a couple of places, depending on the punishment. That would have been even more painful for Max Verstappen after what was not a particularly very good weekend for him. But anyway, the final standings for the race was obviously Lando Norris as the race winner, Oscar Piastri in P2, George Russell the third and final podium spot, then it was Charles Leclerc in 4th, Fernando Alonso in 5th, Gabriel Bortoleto in the Kick Sauber. That was a great performance from him, done really well to remain in the top 10, and obviously they finish in 6th is a fantastic result. Lance Stroll dropped up from 6th to 7th. Liam Lawson in the Racing Bulls was finishing in 8th. Max Verstappen finished in 9th. And then Kimi Antonelli, as I said before, it showed signs in the early part of the season that he could do really well. And to be fair, he made up from 15th to 10th. Really good race from him. So he finished in 10th, with Mercedes. Isaac Hadjar in the Racing Bulls was in 11th. Lewis Hamilton was in 12th in the Ferrari. Poor weekend, didn't really move up or down from the qualifying position. Nico Hülkenberg in the other Kick Sauber was in 13th. Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon, the two Williams, was in 14th and 15th. Esteban Ocon in the Haas was in 16th. And then Yuki Tsunoda in 17th. Franco Colapinto and Pierre Gasly, the two Alpines, was 18th and 19th. And obviously Ollie Behrman did have to retire the car. There was some damage obviously on the car, and it wasn't really giving out the same performance. He started off really well in the race, but it sort of started slow, and it wasn't giving off the same performance. So eventually they made the decision, the Haas team, to retire that car, which is unfortunate for him because, like I say, again, another one of the rookies from this year, and seems to be quite a competent driver when the vehicle's working, obviously. So yeah. So just looking ahead and what that means for obviously the overall standings in the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship. So Oscar Piastri is still number 1, 284 points, and Lando Norris is just behind him on 275 points, so that's a 9-point gap, which can be made up. It's definitely going to be an interesting end of the season. Obviously, we do now have a 3-week break before the next Grand Prix, which I believe is in the Netherlands. So yeah, looking ahead to that one, it'll be very interesting. Max Verstappen is still in 3rd place despite having obviously a not so good weekend this weekend. He's still up there on 187 points. George Russell is in 4th, 172 points for him, and Charles Leclerc is on 151 points in 5th. As for the Constructors' Championship, McLaren are miles ahead. Yeah, McLaren are more than double the points ahead of Ferrari, who's in 2nd, Mercedes in 3rd, with Red Bull in 4th. And this is what I was talking about before in terms of the gap. You've got the top 4 teams there: Red Bull on 194 points, Mercedes on 236, Ferrari on 260, and then McLaren on 559 points. And then the 5th place team is Williams, who's on 70 points. There's a massive disparity there in the top 4 and the rest of the pack. It's almost like a dogfight of who can get above who. But yeah, that's how everything is after the race in Hungary. Let me know your thoughts below on a couple of things. One, who do you think is going to win the Drivers' Championship? Do you think it's going to be Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri, or is there maybe an outside shout for Max Verstappen? Personally, it's got to be one of the McLarens, because they are just consistently delivering performance after performance every weekend. And as much as Max Verstappen is an elite driver, he doesn't have the car anymore to win the championship. So for me, it's got to be one of Piastri or Norris. For me, I'm possibly slightly favouring Piastri at the moment. He is obviously ahead. It's only 9 points, so that can change at any given moment. But yeah, two very good drivers at the top of the table. Let me know who you think is going to win the overall championship. Let me know your thoughts on the race this weekend. Just let me know. Do you have a specific team that you prefer to follow, or a driver that you like to watch? Just let me know your team and driver in the comments below. And yeah, apart from that, I don't think there's too much more to mention. So anyway, that's going to wrap up the video today. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and yeah, let me know your thoughts below in the comments. If this is content you do like, please do drop the like button and subscribe as well. It will mean a lot to me, as I'm trying to build up the channel and promote obviously different subjects like football, boxing and Formula 1. So if this is content that you've been waiting for someone to try and produce, then obviously let me know and I'll try and get more out for yourself. But until the next video, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for tuning in, and take care of yourself.
Artlist.io